Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and something really exciting today, and that is Wargaming have released statistics that are currently in development on the super test for the Błyskawica, which is going to be the Tier 10 Polish tech tree tank destroyer. That's right, if you didn't catch my video from last year about what will be coming up in 2024, then yeah, there are some very weird and exciting developments. This is Wargaming's new deep rifled guns with what they're calling star tray shells. In Wargaming's information release about this mechanic, they are saying that these deep rifled guns are unique to World of Tanks. So I'm not quite sure if they're suggesting that they're unique to World of Tanks compared to all of the other tank games that are out on the market. And if that's the case, it's quite interesting that Wargaming are even acknowledging the competition within that sense. Or whether they are meaning that this is just a very unique gun in the World of Tanks ecosystem. So, is this just a look, or is it going to actually feature mechanically inside the game? Well, you'll be happy to know it's both of them, and it will have a brand new mechanic effectively. These shells are going to have the best shell velocity in World of Tanks. The standard rounds are going to have 1,700 meters a second shell velocity, and the premium rounds are going to have 2,000 meters a second shell velocity. That is even better than the APCR rounds that you would get currently on the K91. The current best in World of Tanks is 1,700. 2,000 meters a second means you could pretty much auto-aim at your opponents at decent distances. And while that's not going to help you with aiming at weak points or aiming at the best part of the tank to shoot at, for players out there who do struggle to aim with giving lead at moving targets, you won't have to, almost with 2,000 meters a second. The other very interesting mechanic about these star tray shells is that they are going to have different alpha damages depending on how far they have traveled. And to make it simpler to look at than the statistics provided here, of course, QuickyBaby's put it onto Excel for you. So here we see the alpha damage of the shells, and on the right, their equated damage per minute, as this vehicle has a reload time of 13.7 seconds. Now, for both APCR rounds on this tank, they start off with 800 alpha damage if the target that you hit is nearer than 50 meters, which after this distance slowly decays down to 300 damage if it penetrates the enemy tank at 500 meters, with, I guess, the halfway distance here, the tank's alpha falling down to 550. Interestingly, the high explosive rounds on this tank, and remember everything is subject to change, are a fixed amount of 800 if you're able to penetrate, with the tank's 85 millimeters of penetration over any kind of distance. So this means that if the Błyskawica is firing and penetrating tanks that are within 50 meters of it, it is going to have the highest damage per minute in World of Tanks, and not by a small margin. The current highest is the Badger, which has 3,388 DpM, meaning that at less than 50 meters, the Błyskawica is dealing 3.5% more damage per minute than the current highest in World of Tanks. So move over, Badger, your crown is going to be taken. However, we can clearly see that the Błyskawica won't be able to do the best damage at all distances. And that's because it falls to 2,400 at 275 meters, and then down to a paltry 1,313 at 500 meters, which is just an absolute bizarre concept inside the game. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, how are you going to keep tabs on how much damage you're going to do to the target? Well, Wargaming state when using the shells in battle, there's a new mechanic, and you'll see a special widget displaying the expected average damage based on your distance from the enemy. If they are highlighted, as players approach the target, their damage indicator will increase, while it will decrease if they increase the distance to the target. This feature helps make more informed decisions and use both shells efficiently. Interestingly, the difference between the APCR and the HE shells at decent distances, most 800 alpha damage shells are kind of going to do about the 300 damage mark at 500 meters, at least if you're shooting fairly reasonably armored targets. And so it really does kind of become a decision. Would you rather do the guaranteed damage that might be about 100 or 150 against heavily armored tanks, or take the risk of bouncing, not penetrating, and then missing out on doing 300 damage altogether. So apart from this novel mechanic, let's take a look at the statistics of the Błyskawica and see if it's actually going to be any good in the other areas of the tank, because obviously it's got great alpha damage at 800 and fantastic shell velocity, which is why Błyskawica, as far as I'm aware, means lightning in Polish. So the reload time of this tank of 13.7 is fairly standard, a bit like a T10 or a T10, which is why the vehicle will have good damage per minute, because it's got 800 alpha rather than 750 that you'll be used to on most of those kind of tank destroyers. Wargaming don't make mention, unless I'm blind, of the actual caliber of the gun that the Błyskawica will have. And maybe that's because they haven't decided about how do you measure the caliber of a non-round shell within that regard. Do you measure from the edge of the star to the other edge of the star, possibly? How will that affect the overmatch mechanics in World of Tanks? Probably Wargaming aren't going to adapt that, and my guess with this kind of alpha damage and this kind of reload is that this tank is going to get about a 150mm caliber gun. The aim time of this vehicle of 2.5 seconds is not impressive, and really we need to see the hidden statistics such as the gun handling of the dispersion when you're moving and turning the tank to really get an idea of how brutal that's going to be. 0.35 accuracy, that's actually pretty good. It's not bad, but again, it's not incredible for a tank destroyer. 7 degrees of gun depression. Also, I should take a moment to talk about what the vehicle actually looks like. And I'm sure a lot of you out there who have played World of Tanks for a while will be thinking, it looks a lot like an Su-12254. And considering that this is probably the one tank that Wargaming actually removed from the game that they didn't do anything with because it just wasn't really very good and it didn't have a good win ratio, I feel like Wargaming felt like it was unfixable. Well, maybe this is Wargaming bringing it back now with a different kind of mechanic. Interestingly, the Su-12254 was kind of like a glass cannon damage dealer. I don't think the Błyskawica could be considered to be a glass cannon damage dealer, however. So that's 7 degrees of gun depression. It's not good. It's not bad. It's okay. But when you've got vehicles like the Badger and the Minotauro, who are kind of other, should we say, super heavy tank destroyers that want to fight in close quarters combat, having 10 degrees of gun depression, it's not great news. Also, the vehicle's gun traverse speed, not bad. Ammo capacity 60, so you're not going to run out of rounds. And actually, when I think about it, I'd be quite surprised if this vehicle does have 155mm. If it's carrying 60 rounds of ammunition, that'll be very impressive. But if it is, you've got more than enough room for HE, your standard APCR, and your premium APCR. The forward speed on this tank is 45, backwards is 15, which means that is pretty fast for a vehicle which hopefully is going to have some armor, but it doesn't actually look like it has that much to begin with. So it's kind of slow for a medium, fast for a heavy. The power to weight ratio of 16 will allow it to be able to get up to speed even upslope. So now onto the survivability of this vehicle. 2,000 hit points, fairly standard for a tank destroyer. On the low end, but standard for a tier 10 tank. The hull armor is 200 at the front, 70 at the side, and 60 at the rear. And when we can see the angling, I expect that lower plate is going to be tragic. I do think the mantlet will be quite troll. And the upper hull, it doesn't look like it's that well angled. But Wargaming is suggesting that the effective thickness reaches 310mm, with the weak points, aka the lower plate and the cupola on top, being relatively compact. So unlike the Badger or the Minotauro, it's not going to be a super heavy tank within that regard. The 370 view range is quite disappointing. It means that you're going to have a really good crew and most likely a premium consumable with the field mods to get a decent view range on this tank if you don't want to use coated optics. And a lot of you will be interested in the crew that this vehicle has, as we now know what you should get training with regards to your Polish nation inside the game if you want to get the Błyskawica on day one, or at least start grinding towards it, then these, and undoubtedly Wargaming will probably release a premium tank destroyer between now and the tech tree being released. So if you want to, get training a crew. You're going to need a commander, a gunner, a driver, and a loader. Pretty standard stuff here. And if it's anything like all of the other Polish tanks, it's usually the commander who's the radio operator, but don't quote me on that. So if you're going to invest 1 0 skill crew member, I'd probably make it the commander on this tank to get ready. So all in all, what do I think about the Błyskawica? Well, firstly, let me clarify. Characteristics are not final, and so me passing judgment here is just getting an idea of what Wargaming have planned for this line. Now, I like the novelness of this, doing more damage at close quarters distances. But when I look at the low premium penetration that this vehicle has at 320, being roughly the same speed now as the WZ-113 GFT, this tank does look a lot like it's going to have this kind of a playstyle. The armor is fairly similar. This one has probably the same kind of effective armor that Wargaming suggested in its blurb. And don't worry, this is really nice when you use the 6 degrees of gun depression on this tank. So I guess when you're using the 7 degrees of gun depression on the Błyskawica, it's probably going to play out in a similar kind of fashion. The only difference is the WZ-113 GFT has fantastic HE rounds with 1100 alpha. It has amazing heat rounds at 395 penetration, and it deals 750 damage, not just below 50 meters, but up to 600 meters if you can hit tanks outside your render distance. Whereas the Błyskawica is going to struggle massively. Good luck doing 300 damage every roughly 13 seconds at tier 10. That is not going to work out for you. And you are going to go from having the best damage per minute in World of Tanks to probably the worst damage per minute at tier 10. And honestly, this damage per minute, it's not that much higher than a Badger. And I seriously wonder whether it's going to be worth being a sort of a semi-faster tank to lose all of that armor when World of Tanks is really so much about bludgeoning through the heavy flanks. So all in all, so far, they don't look like they're going to be outrageous. And while they will have a new mechanic, I just don't really think that it's going to bring too much to the game. Shell velocity, whatever. Dealing 800 damage, whoa, yeah, I'm really going for it at 50 meters. Yeah, whatever. A Minotaur is hitting for 530, and it's reloading much faster than this vehicle will, and it has roughly about the same damage per minute. But then again, it does have that magazine reload, and the Badger, its high explosive rounds will scale very much more than this vehicle's will, as they have a flat 800 at close quarters, which meaning that the Badger will absolutely destroy this thing if it's able to penetrate HE shells. Also, the Badger is going to be able to lock down the tracks of the opponents to be able to control the fight. I'm just not really sure that the Błyskawica is going to be that crazy. But what I might be underestimating with this vehicle is how good the upper hull might get with its 7 degrees of gun depression. And the other thing that I probably am not focusing on is when you slap a turbo on this vehicle, depending on what field mods it gets, it's going to be going at 50 kilometers an hour, which means that this thing contesting against medium tanks for getting into position on certain maps could be fairly interesting. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my initial opinion on the NC70 Błyskawica. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think, not only about this tank, but what it means for the future of the Polish tank destroyer line. Do you think that they all look really exciting now, or do you think that they look a little bit disappointing? And do you think this mechanic is Wargaming just trying to create different things in the game that seem exciting but actually will end up being pretty whatever inside the game? Or do you think that it's really fun and it is going to be unique for World of Tanks? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.